The man who owned the company hated it. He called it a poached egg. He hated the shape, and he hated the young engineer who designed it. And yet that car went on to become the first British car in history to sell 1 million. It was loved by a nation, driven by doctors, farmers, vicars, and grandmothers. And it hid a strange little secret. Late in its design, someone took the prototype and sliced it in half, lengthways. Right down the middle. What happened next accidentally created one of the best-handling small cars of its age. And it turned a rejected ugly duckling into a British icon. This is the story of the Morris Minor, and the 4-inch cut that changed everything. To understand it, go back to the Second World War. Britain was fighting for survival, and building family cars was the last thing on anyone's mind. But in secret, at the Morris factory in Cowley, one small team was already dreaming of peacetime. At the heart of it was a young engineer named Alec Issigonis. Remember that name, because a decade later, this same man would design the Mini. Issigonis was brilliant, stubborn, and completely uninterested in doing things the normal way. He was given a codename project, the Mosquito, a brand new small car for the ordinary British family. And Issigonis wanted it to be nothing like the tall, narrow pre-war cars of the day. He wanted it low, wide, modern, something that would still look fresh 10 years later. He filled it with clever ideas that cheap cars simply did not have in 1948. Think about what Issigonis put into a humble little economy car. He pushed the wheels right out to the corners, one at each end. He gave it rack and pinion steering, light, sharp, and precise. He gave it independent front suspension, using torsion bars. He used unitary construction, where the body and frame are a single strong shell. And he wrapped it all in a body designed for maximum space inside, minimum waste outside. None of these ideas were brand new on their own, but no cheap car had ever combined them all from a clean sheet like this. It made the Minor one of the most modern small cars in the world when it appeared. There was just one thing Issigonis couldn't fix: power. The handling was superb. The performance was gentle, to put it kindly. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because the car nearly looked completely wrong. By 1947, the Mosquito was almost ready for production. The factory was tooling up, the deadline was closing in, and Issigonis stood back, looked at his prototype, and hated what he saw. It was too narrow. For its length, it looked tall and awkward. It looked pre-war. The very thing he was trying to escape. Most engineers this late in the day would have shrugged and let it go. Issigonis was not most engineers. He ordered the prototype to be cut, physically, right down the middle from nose to tail. Then he had the two halves pulled apart, a little at a time. He stood there, staring, until the proportions finally looked right. The gap he settled on was 4 inches. And just like that, he widened the entire car by hand, by eye, at the last possible moment. Suddenly it looked planted, purposeful, modern. The awkward little egg had become something elegant. But changing a car 4 inches wide this late left marks, and you can still see them today. The bumpers had already been manufactured for the narrower car. There was no time and no money to make new ones. So the factory tipped those bumpers, cut them in half, and bolted a 4-inch filler plate into the middle. Look closely at an early Morris Minor and you can see it. A little strip right in the center of the bumper, the scar of the cut. The bonnet got a flat section added down its center line too. That subtle ridge running down the middle of an early Minor's bonnet? That is the fingerprint of the day Issigonis sliced his car in half. And the floor was widened with extra sections either side of the transmission tunnel. It was a bodge, a last-minute save. But it worked in a way nobody expected. Because widening the car didn't just fix the looks. It pushed the wheels further apart. It widened the track. And a wider track, combined with those torsion bars, gave the Minor something remarkable. Balance, grip, stability. This cheap little family car suddenly handled better than cars costing far more. Drivers noticed immediately. It felt planted and safe and fun in a way its rivals simply weren't. An accident, born of panic and a tight deadline, had made the Minor genuinely great to drive. Issigonis had cut his car in half to make it prettier. And by luck, he'd also made it handle like nothing else in its class. There's one more fingerprint of those early years, and it's the easiest to spot. The very first Minors had a windscreen split down the middle by a central bar. 2 flat panes of glass, instead of one curved sheet. It was a way to keep costs down in a cash-strapped post-war Britain. And it gave those early cars an affectionate nickname that survives to this day. Lusty. To fans, a split-screen Morris Minor is the one to have, the purest version of Issigonis' original idea. There was one dream Issigonis didn't get to keep. He had designed the Mosquito around a radical engine, a flat 4, smooth and compact. But the man at the top said no. It was too expensive, too unconventional. So at the last minute, that clever engine was scrapped. In its place went an old, wheezing pre-war side-valve engine. It made about 27 horsepower. It was slow. It was the one truly old-fashioned thing in an otherwise modern car. Years later, after Morris merged with Austin to form BMC, the Miner finally got a better engine, the A-Series, a tough little unit that would, one day, also power the Mini. But at launch, Issigonis' masterpiece was held back by an engine from another era. And then there was the man at the very top, William Morris, Lord Nuffield, the founder, the man whose name was on the car. He did not like the Miner, and he did not like Issigonis. As the story goes, he took one look at the prototype and called it a poached egg. He reportedly wanted nothing to do with it and would rather have kept building the old pre-war models. He even objected to that clever flat-4 engine. The boss of the company was, quietly, the new car's biggest enemy. The expected name, Mosquito, was dropped. After the widening and the bigger plans, it no longer felt like a tiny insect of a car. So they reached back and reused an old Morris name from before the war. The car nobody at the top wanted was ready to meet the public. On the 27th of October 1948, the Morris Miner was revealed at the Earl's Court Motor Show in London. And the public did something Lord Nuffield never expected. They fell in love. It was cheap, it was cheerful, it was easy to drive and easy to own. And it kept getting better. Over the years, it grew into a whole family. A 2-door and a 4-door saloon, a convertible tourer, a van and a pickup for tradesmen, and the charming traveler estate with its structural timber frame, a real wooden skeleton built into the body. That traveler is worth pausing on. The wooden frame at the back wasn't just for looks, it was a genuine structural part of the car. Ash timber, shaped and jointed like fine furniture, holding the rear of the body together. Owners have to care for that wood to this day, oiling and treating it like the deck of a boat. It made the humble miner feel like something handcrafted. And the vans and pickups became the workhorses of a nation. Post office vans, bakers' vans, farmers' pickups. For decades, if a small business in Britain needed cheap, reliable transport, the answer was very often a Morris Miner. It didn't just carry families, it carried the everyday work of the whole country. The Miner became the car of everyday Britain. Not glamorous, not fast, just honest, likable, and everywhere. And under the skin, it kept improving. That wheezy old pre-war engine was eventually replaced by the tough little A-Series. It grew from 800 cubic centimeters to nearly 1,000, and finally to 1,100. Never powerful, but willing, cheap to fix, and almost impossible to wear out. The doctor's Miner, the vicar's Miner, the district nurse's Miner. It carried families, deliveries, and shopping across every corner of the country. For millions of British people, the Morris Miner was simply the first car they ever knew. The one their parents drove, the one they learned to drive in. That is a kind of fame that horsepower can never buy. And then, it made history. In December 1960, the Morris Miner became the first British car ever to build 1 million examples. No British car had ever reached that number before. To celebrate, the factory built a special edition and gave it a bold name. The Miner Million. 350 were built, 349 were sold to the public. And they were unmistakable. Every single one was painted in a striking shade of lilac, a soft purple unlike anything else on the road. Inside, white leather seats. And on the bonnet and boot, a badge reading 1 million. The car the boss had called a poached egg was now a national milestone. In the end, it wouldn't stop at 1 million. More than 1.5 million Morris Miners would be built before it was over. By the early 1970s, the Miner was old. More than 20 years had passed since Issigonis first sliced his prototype in half. Newer cars, many of them also from Issigonis, like the Mini, had moved the world on. Production finally wound down, ending in 1971. But the Miner never really left. Today it remains one of the most loved cars Britain ever made. Cherished, restored, and still driven, with one of the biggest owners' followings of any classic car. And the young engineer that Lord Nuffield had dismissed as a foreigner? Issigonis had been born far away, in Smyrna, on the coast of what is now Turkey. He came to Britain as a refugee, with almost nothing. And he went on to design the two most important British cars of the century, the Miner and then the Mini. He became Sir Alec Issigonis, knighted by the Queen, celebrated as perhaps the greatest car designer Britain ever produced. The man Lord Nuffield couldn't stand had his name written into history. And through it all, Issigonis always said the Miner was his personal favorite. Even more than the Mini. The car nobody at the top wanted was the one its own creator loved most. So the next time you see a Morris Miner, look at the middle of its bumper. Look for that little strip, the seam down the center. That is the mark of a moment of pure stubborn genius. the day a young engineer refused to accept a car that looked wrong, and cut it in half to make it right. The poached egg that nobody at the top wanted became the car that a whole nation loved, the Morris Minor.